David Wise, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Hello, thank you, and thank you for having me on as well.
Oh, it's an honor to have you. I think a lot of people just want to know, what is your life like these days? I see you have some instruments behind you there, but what is the average day for David Wise like?
The average day is waking up in the morning, going for a cycle ride, coming into my studio, writing some tunes, doing a bit of editing, might do a few emails at some point, but yeah, normally catching up on soundtracks that need finishing.
Okay. Do you ever write music for fun?
Sort of. I certainly play music for fun. I'll go out and play in covers bands with my saxophone and stuff. So, there's definitely still a lot of fun still involved.
Those live shows, do old school Rare fans show up to those live shows and just scream at you to play Donkey Kong and stuff?
The last one in Norway was just crazy. About 250 people turned up at this microbrewery and went wild. We sold, the venue sold out of all the beer where the venue was. It was quite something, really. Yeah, they just went mad for it. It was good fun.
Do they heckle you? Do they make requests for certain songs from your past?
They're always very respectful and very polite, but they'll normally heckle me before I start and see if I'm playing a certain number or if I'm doing such and such. There's quite a fast back catalogue, so often it's sorry, I'm not doing that one this evening, but I normally play for around an hour, and there's things like Aquatic Ambience and Sticker Bush in there.
Oh, that's so good. Are those the top 2 most requested songs for you?
Yeah, that's right. And then I'll play some ukulele and some Snake Pass from Sumo Digital as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Do you have a total in your mind of how many songs you've written throughout your career?
It's probably not worth thinking about.
What do you mean? Not many people have that number. How many?
I'm sure it's in the thousands of tunes that I've written. I'm sure it must be.
Yeah, Paul McCartney, who? I mean, you're dwarfing that guy.
Paul McCartney writes some very good songs, doesn't he? He's done quite well. In fact, I saw the film yesterday, a few days ago, and it's amazing, really good. And it just reminds you how good the Beatles songs were, just amazing.
Yeah, well, someday, the sequel to Yesterday, maybe the next project is going to be people forgetting all about Super Nintendo music, and then your music can be a big part of that as they're making new games.
We'll call it Tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, that's smart. That's a very smart take.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you left Rare a long time ago, but you keep coming back, it seems like, to passion projects and kind of spiritual successors to the old Rare projects. What is that like? How is that communication channel established again and again?
I left Rare 10 years ago. Obviously, we've kept in touch with each other, so it's nice to catch up with the people who used to work there and do a few things together, which is quite nice. Obviously, when I left Rare, I went over and did some work with Retro Studios over in Texas, but that wasn't part or anything to do with Rare. That was directly with Nintendo.
Yeah. What was that like? Okay, so that was for Tropical Freeze then?
Yeah, that was Tropical Freeze, yeah. And the other projects I've worked on, things like Ukulele and this Tamarin project, they were started again many years ago. It's taken quite a while to get Tamarin up and running, or at least across the finishing line. But, with that one, Omar, he managed to get a few of us together. And then after we pretty much finished that project, a guy called Gavin over at Playtonic got in touch with us. And it was good to get some of the old school traditional Rare devs back together to do some more work together.
Is that nice? Is it always refreshing? Is there any part of you where it's like, I thought I left this world behind and these people keep dragging me back in?
It's very kind to be asked, isn't it? It's very reassuring. So I always like to go and do stuff with people that we've worked with together before. It's very nice. It's like going home.
Yeah. Okay, so this Tamarin project from Chameleon Games, do you want to just walk through your history of that project and what you're hoping to accomplish with the music here?
I think it was probably about 5 years ago when Omar had contacted me. He'd certainly contacted people like Steve Mails and Kevin Bayliss and a few other people to see if they wanted to work on a Rare style game on the PS4. So it sort of all started over here in Nottingham, which is where I am. We met up at a local restaurant, had a bit of a chat, decided what we were going to do. Omar showed me a few levels and some of the ideas that he had, and we all got to work.
Yeah.
And then I think at that point, really, probably a few years ago, we just let Omar get on with finishing it. I think he hoped it was going to be a lot sooner, but these things take time, and I think it was the back end of last year when he got in touch again and said, I've nearly finished this project. Can you write a few more tunes? And so that's when I finished it off.
Nice. How are you feeling about the soundtrack overall?
I think overall it's quite nice. It sort of blends in. You wouldn't know that there was a gap of 3 or 4 years between the starting it and finishing it. Funnily enough, one of the recent tracks I did was called Fjords, and that was based on really a sort of Norwegian style. I think Omar actually comes from Norway, and I based it on visiting a place called Sandefjord, which is where I was a few weeks ago, and I've been there 2 years previously as well. And that's really where I took the inspiration from. So it was nice to go back a few weeks ago and see it all again. I think really overall the Fjords track is one of my favourite ones from the actual whole of that game.
Can you notice your evolution or even your interest musically shifting in that 3 to 4 year gap?
If I'm honest, not really. It's different. It's certainly progressed because whilst you're writing music, you're taking bits and inspiration from so many different places. You can't help but shift really in the style of music that you do. But yeah, there's definitely similarities, but I think it's probably progressed as well.
Do you notice it's shifted a lot since early 90s? Has your sensibility completely changed, or do you listen to that old music and say, yeah, this just sounds good to me still?
I can hear the difference between the 90s and now, but I'm still quite pleased with the work that I did then. It's not vastly different. I think as long as you've got a decent tune, then it will transcend time and hopefully still be valid maybe 2 decades later if we're lucky.
Yeah. Do you ever go back and listen to any of your old music for fun, or just to kind of refresh your memory a little bit?
I think there's always so much to do, then I don't really have time. If I need to go back and listen to something specific, then I'll go back and find it, and they're all on old CDs that I have over there. And I might have to, I suppose YouTube's probably the easiest resource. Just type in the tune name and hopefully somebody will have made a video of it. So that's normally where I reference my old material. But on the whole, I tend not to try and reference it, only if it's for a specific thing that somebody's asking for.
Right. I mean, thinking about your productivity back in the day, it's just insane to look at the amount of games that you pumped out. And wondering how you reflect on kind of that era of productivity from yourself and from Rare overall. Like, what's the lesson we can take from just how many games you all cranked out back in the day? Were you just working that hard and we should aspire to work that hard?
I think there's certainly more than one way of looking at this. Back in the day, we were fresh. It was all very new. And we were, I suppose, fumbling in the dark because we didn't know where we were going. We were trying to find where, the musical style, we were trying to find the game style and stuff. And also, the games weren't as big. We could put them out a lot quicker because they just weren't as vast as some of the games are now. And I think the quickest game I probably worked on probably took a week, and then something like Star Fox Adventures took about 5 years. So there was a vast difference between styles. I think these days they tend to take between about 6 months and 2 years, which is it's probably a more sensible timeline, but trying to put something out in a week means you really have to work on your instincts and try and throw something together that will hopefully be okay. I found that there's probably an optimum amount of time to spend on a soundtrack, and probably, again, between 6 months and 2 years. It's nice depending on how complicated the game is. If you have too long, you spend too long on it and you overthink it.
Yeah. Did you have more time to work on Donkey Kong Country than other projects back in the day?
Back in the day, yeah, I've been knocking the NES projects out quite quickly. So, as I say, between a week and perhaps a month, and it was refreshing all of a sudden to have a decent sound chip that actually sounded like music, and then have a year to work on a soundtrack. But even back in the day, I was still typing it all in. It wasn't MIDI. I'd have a keyboard so I could bash some ideas out. But I was still doing a lot of coding, putting a lot of hex numbers in, and that's how it was all done. So we needed that year just to get the music in time.
Yeah. Okay. Can you dive in a little bit deeper just on the overall process for creating just one track for Donkey Kong Country? Like, so how does this work? Do you get concept art of the level, or where do you start from and how do you end?
The process is I would see the level, I would see it working, I'd be able to play it, I'd be able to get a feel for the rhythm that it needed to be, the speed. And then I'd go away, get my keyboard and bash a few ideas out, listen to a lot of music for ideas and inspiration, and and try and create something that hopefully brings all of those disparate bits together and mesh it into something. And then I think with on the original DKC Jungle theme, there's about 3 ideas that I had floating around, and I put all 3 of them together, which is why it sort of changes quite a lot throughout the piece. Once we've got that, we need to get the samples. So I'd go off and find the samples, and there's only 64K, so it means that your drum samples have to be as tiny and as small as possible to get them into the cartridge. So there was a lot of optimization going on, and then once we got that and I got the idea for the music, then I had 8 monophonic channels to work with, which means it just plays one note at a time. So there was a lot of assembling the bits together, very, very piecemeal, very laboriously to try and get it to work. But once you had got it working, you could hear it was going to work. That's, kind of drives you on because you know what it's going to sound like towards the end. But it's quite an involved process, and it's a process I'm glad I don't have to do anymore.
So, I mean, what was your overall mission for the first Donkey Kong Country soundtrack? Were you trying to go for a specific theme or just vibe that you hadn't experienced in video games before?
I think that's probably more on the second one. But the first one, I was just trying to. I think coming from the NES, which was basically sounded like a glorified doorbell, it was nice to be given samples to work with, and it was like being let off a leash, taking the dog off the lead and running. And so I got all these different ideas, and I was just trying to get as much in there as possible, again, with the small amount of space that I had to work with. So it was seeing what worked, because not everything did. You can't put any big synth sounds in there because you just don't have the memory. So it was taking those bits and putting them back in a different order to see what we could come up with.
Yeah. Are you cool if we play a little bit of that jungle theme and try and refresh your memory of the song you've heard 6,000 times? All right, let's take a listen here, Leo. So that transition, or like when the beat drops, the Donkey Kong beat drops there, that's what you're talking about, of like stitching different versions together here?
No, this isn't the jungle theme which is the main first level. This is the actual intro theme. This one came along a lot later in the project, probably towards the end of the project. And it's basically a play on taking the original theme that Nintendo had written and adding a bit on, rearranging it. And the idea was to start with the NES bit, the bit that made the Donkey Kong famous, and mess it up really, to try and make it a bit funky and a bit more lively than the NES, just to show the difference in the progression.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's almost like voice samples, like Donkey Kong voice samples thrown in there as well. Was that just because it was later in the project you could pull in those from the actual gameplay?
That's right, yeah. So some of the monkey and ape samples that we used in the game have been used, and I've pitched them in there and used them.
Okay. Do you remember?
Just to give it hopefully a bit of humour in there as well.
Yeah. When you hear this song, can you remember specifically when you wrote it, the room you wrote it, all that stuff?
I can certainly remember the room I wrote it in, because that was a converted cattle shed. And we were on a farm. It's called Manor Farmhouse, and I think the devs were in the main building at different parts, and the musicians were in the cattle shed. And we divided it into 4 units, and there weren't any direct windows in there. We had a big door, but it wasn't open very often. We had a single skylight lighting the room, and it seemed to be locked away from the world, just writing these tunes.
Do you have pictures of those days? I hope something has remained.
I don't know, no, and I don't think it's really healthy to be not to be able to see outside of your door or your window. It's quite repressive, really. I wouldn't do it again.
You know what really bummed me out is, as a kid, I loved watching this VHS. I think Nintendo Power made it, which was like the making of the original Donkey Kong Country. And I went back and watched it again, hoping that there'd be a segment on the music. We could see you in your heyday. And it was just somebody from Nintendo, like basically playing your music. It was such a bummer not to see you and like the core of Rare interviewed for that.
Yes, they were very protective over us, so they did kind of shield us from it, or shield the world from us. I don't know which way around it was.
I think they should have shielded the world from that host of that video, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and also we didn't know how big it was going to be then. We were just making a game as far as we thought. You know, we knew it was pretty cool because it was on the Super NES, but it wasn't the next gen. It wasn't the next Sega or the next N64 or anything. We were just trying to make this Super NES cartridge bigger and better than it was. But we didn't have any idea for several years how big that game was going to be.
Do you remember like the first discussions about what this project was going to be, like what the pitch was from Nintendo of what they wanted?
I think it wasn't like a big discussion where we all sat down and this is what it's going to be. It kind of morphed into it, where we'd been showing Nintendo the 3D renders and the advanced computer graphics, as they called it, the ACM software, where they were taking pre-rendered graphics and making them work, and everything suddenly looked as though they could pick it up and take it out to the screen. It looked quite good, and it morphed there, really. You could see the difference between the graphics, then they looked a whole lot better. And I think as a music department, we decided that we needed to make the music that we were making to be on par as best we could with these new advanced graphics.
Yeah, that's wild. Do you have a favorite track from the Donkey Kong Country series that you want to dive into and tear apart a little bit here?
I think my favorite one on DKC1 was the Aquatic Ambience. And what I'd done, I had this synth called a Korg Wave Station, and it used very small waveforms, which was handy because we didn't have much memory on the Super NES, and they didn't have resonant filters or anything on the first Wave Station. And so to get the idea that you get these synth sounds that kind of go wah like that, you know, so it sounded squelchy and stuff. They were taking these little waveforms, which were tiny, and they were just running through them in sequence, and you get the effect that you were turning the synthesizer controls. So I borrowed that idea, and because I was still typing everything in, I could type everything as subroutines. I didn't have to use MIDI, so I could program it to do whatever I wanted at that point, and that's how I got it to sound probably a little more synthetic and more synthy, and to do more than you might imagine the Super NES chip would do, because I was borrowing this style from the Korg Wave Station. And with Aquatic Ambience was the first time I got the idea. So there's 8 different sounds, and I've just put them in quarter notes or 8 notes, and they just go along. And that's the bass line, just stepping through these different, very short sounds. And that created the rhythm, and everything else is built on top of that.
Yeah. Leo, you want to pipe that into the... There we go.
There we go.
Do you remember playing this for the developers at the time and any initial reactions?
I did. I wondered whether they'd like it.
Oh, sorry, you're breaking up a little bit, David. What'd you say?
I spent about 5 weeks putting this together.
Just this one track?
Just this one track, just to see whether the technology would work.
Wow. So this was like the biggest technological feat, you think, from that first game?
Yeah, so you can hear it now stepping through those waves on the bass line. If you have a listen.
And so that's the saxophone part that you play now?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It sounds more to me, I don't know if I have it around, I don't, or do I? No, I don't. It sounds more like a melodica.
Gotcha.
and sometimes I do play it on the melodica, but it just sounds more musical on the saxophone.
Yeah, absolutely. What were your main inspirations back then for the first Donkey Kong Country? Who were you listening to a lot? Who were you pulling from in your mind?
I think there were, because I decided, again, using those single cycle waveforms and being able to make it sound synthetic, I was listening to a lot of Vangelis, a lot of Jean-Michel Jarre, a lot of Gary Newman, these big synth artists at the time, and I could almost try and recreate that. And it was, again, the technical challenges of trying to take something that somebody had spent a lot of money on and get it into the SNES using almost nothing was quite a driving force with some of the compositions, just trying to make it sound bigger than a Super NES.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about like the synth inspirations and making it more synthetic. I think a lot of people think of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack and think it sounds so natural, like trying to bring in bongos and more of a natural kind of natural vibe overall to the Super Nintendo, which was different than a lot of other games they'd heard.
Yeah, I've always been drawn to African and Latin American percussion and things like bongos, congas, shakers, that kind of stuff. And I just find it a bit more interesting than just having a drum kit. I like drum kits, and it's nice to have a great drum kit going, but it's nice to enhance it with percussion. I think that comes from, I used to work in a music shop before I worked for Rare, and we had these early drum machines. There was the 707, and I also had the 727, which had the percussion. And the 707 sounded great, which was the drum kit, and the percussion was a bit disappointing. But then when you played them both together, it was absolutely awesome. So from an early sort of perspective, I'd had this idea that getting the drum kit and then adding the percussion really adds something. So that's really where all the percussion was, because I just like listening to percussion with drum kits. So there was a lot of percussion.
Yeah, that's nice. Can we pop in to Gangplank Galleon, Leo? What does that make you think of when you hear that song again?
It makes me think of Iron Maiden.
That was good for you going forward with Gangplank Galleon?
And there's a reason for that. Just before I started working on this, I'd been down at a trade show in London, buying some recording equipment for Rare and the musicians who were starting. And whilst we were there was a special demonstration. Nick Bain, the drummer, was there, and also the guitarist from Iron Maiden. And I was probably about 20 feet away from them, and they're all set up. And the singer wasn't there, it's just the band, really, and they were demonstrating these products. And when I got back to Rare, I think this was the piece I was working on, so there was a lot of the Iron Maiden inspiration in there, especially with the ding 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 ding.
I've never connected that before. That's amazing. Did you ever listen to in the latest Smash Brothers that came out last year? They had a remix of Gangplank Galleon with some rap thrown in there and stuff. Did you ever hear that version?
Yeah, it was like a mariachi band, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was just loud and amazing. What did you think of that one?
I thought it was great. It's something I wouldn't have done, and so it was nice to hear somebody else's interpretation. It was off the wall, really. I think, again, when I heard that, only a few months before that, I'd been to Mexico, and sing mariachi bands. So it was nice to hear a mariachi band version of that same piece. It was quite wild.
Did you do any consulting on Smash Brothers? Did you have any clue of the music that was coming out?
No. I just saw it on a trailer and thought, oh, that's nice.
That's
they've
amazing.
used a piece of my music, which is great. But yeah,
sweet.
And it's nice to hear all the different versions that they do and have used over the years.
Yeah, definitely. Leo, can you jump into the main theme, the title theme from Diddy's Conquest? The second game there. What does it make you think of?
Sorry?
I said, what does that make you think of hearing that one again?
That makes me think of Russian composers.
Russian composers?
But by this time I was very much influenced by Prokofiev and Tchaikovsky. And I was also listening to a lot of Mugursky as well. I don't know why, it's just where I was at the time. That's what I was listening to. And thinking, when it comes to composers, those three composers just really knew how to use the orchestra to get different textures, different dynamics, and really pull emotions. I thought, that's amazing. And I was trying to get some of that into the whole of the DKC2 scoring as well, because it was darker, it was a darker game. It kind of fitted well with what they were doing. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of and remembering listening to so much Prokofiev, and I can't even pronounce his name, sorry, Prokofiev. And Tchaikovsky. I mean, they're both amazing composers. And Mugursky as well. He was another one who was very influential at the time.
Oh, that's nice.
And so that's what it. And also, the way that they're using stuff, it's really quite good. And again, we've done the stuff with the first game, and on this second game, it was trying to make it sound orchestral. And when you've only got like 64K of memory, to be able to get anything that even remotely sounds orchestral was quite an achievement. It was just where I was, and I was quite happy with the result.
I used to love that main theme so much. I remember just blasting it on a friend's Game Boy and like holding it up to my ear just over and over again. And also, I was in love with the movie Hook at the time, and like the main theme of Hook has a lot of similarities to that. Does that get brought up a lot to you?
It does, and again, the main theme of Hook has referenced some of the same composers I was listening to as well.
Oh,
so it was. It was interesting to hear that in the 12/8 thing with the da-da-da-da-da strings. So I've used something similar, and but the orchestration or the main theme were definitely Prokofiev, and the way he uses his trombones and blasts it through, and again Mugursky as well. Where you've got that really big melody, the brass.
Oh, that's interesting. So even though there's like the pirate ship connection and sense of adventure and all that stuff, you just saw it as a coincidence that also John Williams was pulling from the same Russian ancestry?
I'm not sure. He was certainly using similar voicings to the Russian composers, so it was nice to hear it. And again, with it being Hook, it kind of had the same kind of vibe. And there's a lot of, it goes back to the Gangplank Galleon, where it's also 12/8. It's kind of hooks in with that. No pun intended. But I was listening to a lot of nautical themes, and they do tend to be in 12/8.
Okay, interesting. Can we listen to Lockjaw's Saga a little bit, Leo? sounds so good.
Thank you.
The complexity of the music and also just having it work through so many stages and layering up and changing so much, was that a mission statement for you for all of your music, or with Donkey Kong Country do you feel like it took a step up in and of itself?
I mean, you obviously hear the water on its own, so it was really hard to get sound effects in there of any significant quantity. So I worked them into the soundtrack, which is why it starts off with the drums and just the water splashing against the hull. Again, there's the direct Russian composer influence coming in there with the dancing strings, with the woodwind dancing around on the top, and these big horn melodies coming in underneath. So that's really, again, the inspiration for that.
Dumb question. The water sound effects, I mean, is that literally you swashing a bucket around, or do you have to just create that all digitally and hope it sounds somewhat like water?
No, it was... There were a few sound effects from sound effect CDs that we had at the time. I don't know which ones it was, but I'd just taken these snippets of sound effects and tried, again, the way we were doing it musically, just to try and get this feeling that you were actually on a boat with some water swirling around.
Yeah.
Again, limited resources, so it was just doing what we could do with what we were given.
Yeah, absolutely. And so can you talk about your working relationship with like Grant Kirkhope back then? Because he was also, starting at Rare around this era, right?
It was around that era, because I think the first thing that we got him to do was to take the DKC2 soundtrack and convert it over to the Game Boy, which was no easy feat. So he set up training at the deep end, and he was in the chicken shed, whereas I was in the cow shed.
So would you hear about a new project and then the two of you would compete to see who would actually get to write music for it? Or did you have first pick for everything moving on? Or how did that relationship work?
Oh no, it was definitely, it was run by Tim and Chris Stamper, and what they said went. So whatever they wanted happened, really. So we'd graciously accept their decision.
How would you describe your overall sensibilities at the time compared to Kirkhope's? How did you guys differentiate?
I think you'd have to ask Grant that, really. Sure. I mean, we obviously have different styles and we do things differently, which is good when you've got many games coming out and lots of different composers. But I think we probably complement each other quite well now. But I think the way the dev studios worked then is that everyone had or worked in a separate barn, and the music, each barn was assigned a musician, or each project was assigned a musician. So there was quite a lot of competition, which is good because you're competing to do better than the other team. It's good in some ways. In the other, there's a lot of squabbling and stuff like that. But we were quite young at the time, and it was just the way it was. I'm not sure it was the best way, but it kind of worked out quite well because people are still humming the tunes that both me and Grant did, so we can't really complain.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you ever get any feedback from like Koji Kondo within Nintendo about the soundtrack to Donkey Kong Country?
No, the only feedback I really got at the time, I think Miyamoto-san came over at some point or a couple of times, and he seemed quite enthusiastic. I certainly didn't hear any direct feedback from Kondo-san. It was Yamamoto-san who, when I went over to Retro Studios many, many years later, who it gave me some feedback on what we were doing. And they were just trying to work out, going back then, how we'd managed to do what we'd done, really. And so I was explaining, we coded it all. There's no MIDI and stuff like that. So that's how we did it. But it wasn't until really I was at Retro Studios that I actually got some direct feedback.
That's so wild. So many years later?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That we were, again, sheltered from direct feedback. Most of it came via the Stampers because they were running the company. Yeah. And I think in some ways that was good because I think in any company there's a lot of noise coming from people who are wanting different things, that business end of stuff. When you're trying to be creative and work on music, you don't need to concern yourself with any of that. So I think it probably worked quite well.
Yeah. Would you ever be interested in working with Retro again in the future?
Oh, if they were to ask, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have just a ton of unreleased tracks that you've created that will just never see the light of day?
I'm working on an album which is codenamed 2020, which is a lot of unreleased tracks and ideas and stuff. Well, normally, apart from going cycling in the morning, I try and spend an hour just creating an idea. It doesn't have to be a very good idea. It just has to be a bit of a snippet of an idea. I don't always do it, but when I get into the habit of doing it, then I'll probably have months and months and months of these little 1 minute snippets of ideas. And I've got many of those that I intend to make into an album and bring the first of those out, hopefully next year in 2020.
Oh, amazing. So it's not so much that those are like from canceled game projects or anything like that. Those are original.
Yeah, they're original. I think one of the things I learned at Rare is if we hadn't quite got something right, if we'd present a tune to the stampers and we'd say, well, I've got this one, and they go, yeah, it's not quite right. If you were to take back an amended version of the same tune, they'd reject it again. So it's just easier to scrap it and start again. And so I got into the habit of just scrapping something that wasn't quite right and starting afresh and going back to the inspiration and trying to do something that was different, stronger. And I got into that habit, and I still probably do that. So creating a new tune seems far easier than going back and rehashing an old one.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. If you could work on any game series, what would you want to work on?
Yeah, I get asked this quite a lot, and I'm not quite sure. I mean, I was being delighted to work on Donkey Kong series. I really enjoy working on that one. Zelda, I'd love to work on Zelda, given the choice. But then things like Metal Gear Solid, that'd be awesome.
Really? What about that attracts you?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of my favorite soundtracks, Metal Gear Solid. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, it's also pulling from the Russian composers, right? Even for like the main theme, it goes back to like Winter's Road and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's got a real powerful, sort of gut-wrenching type sound that really suits the gameplay. That kind of thing would be, great.
Oh, God. If Konami made a new Metal Gear and they brought back David Hayter and they recruited David Wise, it's a David Dream Team. That's amazing.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic, yeah. But I do like the series anyway. So, it'd be nice to see what they do with it next.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anybody you've always wanted to collaborate with in the video game industry? Or outside of the game industry, even?
Well, there's a few interesting projects coming up that I can't talk about, sadly.
Oh, and they are collaborations?
There are some collaborations and some projects coming up which are quite interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they turn out, if they turn out, and what comes of them.
Okay. Are they indie or bigger?
Probably bigger. So, but they might not necessarily be games either.
Oh, very interesting. Have you done much work? Do you want to compose films and TV shows moving forward?
It's different. I can't give anything away because I'm sworn to secrecy. But there's a few different types of media I've been working with. So I'm looking forward to seeing the final result of those.
Interesting. Were you asked to consult on that Donkey Kong Country TV show back in the day at all?
No, not at all. No. Not that I remember. I can remember being asked to deliver all of my tracks and give them over so that they could listen to them as reference. But it would have been nice to have done the soundtrack for the TV show. That would have been marvellous. But alas, I was working on different video games.
Yeah, certainly. I think you could improve that soundtrack a little bit. It's a rough go on that Donkey Kong Country show at times.
If I'm honest, I hadn't heard it until probably 2 years ago.
Oh, really?
Just because I got round to it, and I'd seen it on YouTube, and I thought, that could have done with a bit more pizzazz.
Pizzazz is putting it kindly. Did you have thoughts on the new Battletoads that Microsoft revealed?
Yeah, it'd be nice to see it. I've only seen the demo at E3, when they had the big announce, and that one sounds almost identical to the one we did 30 years ago, because I put together a demo 30 years ago, went into the studio, got some big guitars and stuff, and it sounds very similar. So I haven't heard any of the new stuff for the game yet. As for the style, I think we just need to wait and see how it turns out. It's quite different from what I anticipated. Yeah,
just the art style and overall vibe.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the Toads in Killer Instinct, the new one of that, where they look great in that, and it's certainly a different style that they've chosen for the game. So it'll be nice to see how it pans out.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, anything you want to say about anything else you want to say about your work on Tamarin overall?
On Tamarin, again, it was a nice 3D game. I haven't done many 3D games overall, so it was nice to be given the opportunity to work on Tamarin and do some 3D style gameplay. And I'm looking forward to seeing it after all this time, seeing how it comes out.
Yeah, I think Omar said something in email about how one of the first things you were doing was something about ants choreography, something like that.
Oh yeah, some of the gameplay and some of the ants that Omar had asked me to get them to dance in tune, in time with one of the levels. So we picked one of the tunes I'd worked on, and we really went to town trying to sync up these ants dancing in time. So I actually haven't seen it in the finished product yet, so I'm looking forward to seeing them dancing.
Yeah. And do you know when the game's coming out?
I've got no idea. I think it's later on this year, September, October time, I hope.
Okay. Yeah, I think Steam says summer 2019, but that could very well be a September thing. Okay, so I'd imagine people listening or watching this interview, they might be a little bit inspired to go listen to some of your past work. Is there a certain track that you're most proud of? Anything you'd want to point them towards? Maybe something a little more below the radar?
I think that the soundtrack I'm most proud of overall is the whole of Tropical Freeze. It was very nice to come back to the series, and I certainly went for it again, but I had the freedom of using large computers, lots of VST instruments, lots of live instruments, and so again it was almost like going from the NES to the Super NES. It's like being given this freedom. Well, you can do what you want now, David, get on with it. So I think the whole of it, I do listen to that. That's probably one soundtrack I do listen to and think, oh yeah, that kind of worked.
Oh, that's amazing. Is there one track in particular we could dissect a little bit here?
There is, but the trouble is, everything, the name I've given a track has a different name in the actual game. So perhaps if you could read a few of the track names off, I might be able to tell you.
Okay, Leo in the booth, if you could read off every track title for Tropical Freeze, please.
Yeah. Mangrove Cove. Shipwreck Shore.
No.
Canopy Chaos.
Oh, Seashore War. That's it. Seashore War. That's my favorite.
Okay, let's see.
Seashore War.
Coming up.
Thanks, DJ Leo. You're the best, man. So what stands out overall for you with this track?
I think it's quite a simple track. I like the melody, and the chords are quite simple. Some of them are quite off-key on purpose from the high notes. They don't quite fit, and that discord and anxiousness that you get with some of the chords going through. So overall, it sounds quite laid back, but there's that kind of tension that's building all the time. And I like the textures that are going on.
Yeah, it has to be nice too to work with. I'd imagine a guitarist on this track as well. And is it also a choir?
Yeah, it's a friend of mine who's over in Norway with us. He's called Phil Jordan, and he'd done the guitaring on it.
That's got to be nice because, I mean, when you listen to the old Donkey Kong soundtracks, I'd imagine you just imagine yourself in the barn, right? Now you can listen to this and imagine actually collaborating with and what the room was like and stuff like that for all these different scenarios.
Yeah, that's right. Trying to hook it up, we got the nylon guitar, and I don't know, we probably recorded hundreds of takes, just bit by bit, just trying to get the right one.
Oh, that's amazing.
Just to get the phrasing right and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Retro must have been kissing your ass throughout that entire project.
They were, I mean, to be fair, they were extremely helpful. They gave me all the support I needed. They were grand, you know, they did a great job supporting me.
That's so sweet. Did they have a lot of questions about the old days?
Sorry, what was that?
Did they have a lot of questions about the old days?
Yeah, we talked about the old days because when it's Michael Kelbo who runs Retro over in Austin, and he'd come over to Rare whilst we were doing the DKC1 stuff. He came on the business aspect to look after some of those things. So it was nice to be over in Austin working on the music instead. It was quite a nice juxtaposition, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, David Wise, thank you for all your work throughout the years, and looking forward to what you have coming up, man, with Tamarind, and also the mysterious 2020 album. You're going to change the name at some point, right?
Probably, although I quite like 2020. It depends. I'm sure I might change the name, but I'm not very good with names. So 2020, because it's going to come out in 2020, will be fine for me. But sure, there are many people out there who could probably think of something a bit more inspiring than 2020.
Nah, it's good. I think you can't top it. But if you can top it, leave a comment on this YouTube video or, somewhere on GameInformer.com, and Mr. Wise will look through it and weigh the options.
Absolutely. That sounds good to me.
All right, awesome. David, thank you so much, man. Really appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for your time. It's been great talking.
That was just a clip from a larger show called The Game Informer Show. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, or GameInformer.com. We take the fun opportunities and exclusive information from Game Informer magazine and boil it into a show that airs every Thursday with exclusive cover story information, developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So come love games with us.